Hi everybody, it's Tuesday and I am redoing this video quite a few times because I'm trying to do it without all over the place because I am just stunned at some of the insanity and some of the sheer just like factually inaccurate stuff coming out of GDC about the issue of unions. And unfortunately, this involves me going back to our benevolent white cis male overlord, Tim Schafer, for another drubbing. And I don't normally like doing that. I really liked Psychonauts. This always makes me sad. I try to be very understanding of people and their foibles when they're game makers, because nobody should expect a game maker to be a paragon. They just have to be good at making games and not be a complete asshole, in my mind. Making games is hard. We cannot expect perfection from people in this field. They are human beings. But the sheer level of hypocrisy on display, where Tim Schafer did the Michael Moore deal with the union cap and the union shirt, wrinkling up his rented tuxedo and being all, oh yeah, the lighting on this show, it's a union shop and all that stuff. He rah, rah, rah. But the very beleaguered Nathan Grayson at Kotaku, kudos to him, pointed out that reactions to these pro-union sentiments were largely positive, though some questioned the validity of Schafer's skit in particular, given he's the head of a non-unionized studio. And this cuts to the bone of this grandstanding. That, I talked about the problems with the Christchurch grandstanding that Tim Schafer did, but Tim Schafer doesn't need to make a call to action. He can make his actions actually speak and unionize his shop. The point is, it's very hard for indie devs to unionize their shop because reasons that we'll get into in a bit. But reasons. I don't know where Double Fine is located, but it might even be in a right-to-work state. More on that in a bit. But if Tim Schafer was really serious about yay unions, he doesn't have to put on a shirt. He doesn't have to put on a hat. We thank him for putting on a shirt before he leaves his front door, but he doesn't have to do that. He can just unionize his shop, or better yet, bring things up to the conditions that a union would have so they don't need a union. All that red tape, all that money and dues, you don't need it if you run a place where people are happy working and treated fairly and not run to the point of exhaustion. And the fact that Tim Schafer's walk doesn't match his talk is one of the first problems with the pro-union movement in gaming. I haven't actually seen any real answers to the very real questions about how this would work. And the latest head of the IGDA, I always forget her last name, Jen McClain, that's right. I confuse her with Ron McLean, and I'm like, that can't be right. For those of you who don't know who Ron McLean is, you must not be Canadian. He's the co-host of Hockey Night in Canada. The Don Cherry segments on Hockey Night in Canada. So everybody loves Ron McLean. But Jen McClain got in doo-doo with the extra pro-union voices, even though she herself seems to be something of a pro-union voice. And I find it kind of interesting that they stacked a panel all with pro-union people and they still managed to fight and accuse each other of bigotry. Oh, GDC, never change. Actually, please do change, because as amusing as this is pretty serious stuff, and it's really sad to watch it keep falling flat on its face. Again, gotta give kudos to Polygon, Allegra Frank at Polygon. Kudos to her for covering this, objectively and not taking a side and not, because, Polygon, because how dare Jen McClain, she is ableist. Yeah, the head of the IGDA got called ableist at a panel on unionization, but Polygon didn't do that. They covered the whole thing just straight. And because they just covered it, they just covered this person said this person said that, a whole ton of crap has bubbled to the surface where these pro-union people are making claims that are easy to actively disprove. And I'm going to start with one of those. The idea made by an artist, I've never heard of this person, who who cited experience with a graduate student union as a big influence of the support for the Game Workers Unite campaign. So, okay, apples and oranges, more on that later. But they said, women, people of color, trans people, queer people, disabled people, non-binary people, unions can help fight for equal pay regardless of your ability to participate in this process. Sounds great, doesn't it? Unfortunately, history does not back this up. Quite the opposite. I found this article, now granted, I'm aware of the history here, but I found this article in a 3-second Google search. I think I typed in unions racism, and this came up, something like this. But it's a report from the NAACP, Herbert Hill, the labor secretary of the NAACP, which, I'm going to get this wrong, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And if people right now are going, I thought call them colored people was a bad thing. Yes, it is. This is an old organization. But the NAACP is allowed to call itself the NAACP because it's made up of Black people. I'll say that. But Herbert Hill, Labor Secretary and NAACP, held the AFL-CIO's feet to the fire in 1960 because these two unions merging into one promised in 1955 to fix the racism within the various unions that they represent. And the labor secretary of the NAACP had to call them out in 1960 because they still hadn't done it. This is just a snapshot on the problems with racism and sexism in union shops. I don't have time to go into it right now, but because that'd take the entire video, but I'll give you sort of an anecdotal, joking example of why this is ludicrous, because, humor can sometimes make a point far faster than fact can. I said fact, not fap, okay? But fapping's good too. But that old stereotype of a woman walking across a construction site and all the construction workers, who are all mostly white guys, hoot and holler at her and, street harassment her? Those are union guys. There's a reason some stereotypes exist. My God, the people I know who work on union construction sites, who work in union shops, and it was a big problem when I worked in television. The racism and the sexism, especially the sexism in my case. Oh my God, those union guys treated the dancers we had on set like complete crap. They slut-shamed the hell out of them because they were protected. We're union guys. And it was always union guys. And you saw the few women who were with the union very quietly rolling their eyes. And you always saw the women in unions kind of dressed down so they looked like a guy, because there's a huge amount of racism and sexism in unions to this day. So it just, this idea that a game workers union would solve all these other social justice problems, no, they won't. The only things labor unions will be really able to do is cut down on the crunch, manage work hours, and it doesn't even sound like we have the problem of negotiating salaries. It sounds like job security is more the issue. And unions are really limited in how much they can do in that regard for numerous reasons. But, look at the auto workers union in Canada. They couldn't stop the Oshawa plant from closing. They couldn't. They did everything they could. Multiple levels of the government tried. They couldn't do anything. The plant was going to close because the plant needed to close. So unions can't do a ton about job security. They can do something, but usually unions negotiate things like if you get like medical insurance, if you get hurt on the job or something like that. Some of that came up in the Polygon talk. There was a really weird esoteric back and forth about whether unions were going to vet employees. And I hate to break it to the people that got all up in arms. If you require union designation, that is de facto vetting your employees. If your company is a union shop, there's a process called bumping, meaning if somebody gets let go, they can bump somebody beneath them before you fire them, because they have the right to job security. It also means that, well, what that means, if you want to hire externally, you have to fight the union for that. And that's part of the reason the unions tend to make companies more white and more male, because hiring externally gets increasingly difficult. And so you have these cultural issues in unions, meaning they're sexist, racist pigs. And I'm not saying this is true of all union guys. I'm not saying this is true of all unions. I'm saying this is my personal experience with an entertainment union, 2 different entertainment unions. It was not a great place for women to work. And if you're part of a union that isn't like that, more power to you. I mean, the union did advocate for one woman who was being discriminated against because she was a mother. But she also had to sue. So but this idea of vetting potential hires for game studios, unions do that by default because you need to be part of the union. And the union gets upset if there are union members who don't have jobs and you try to hire somebody from outside the union. So all this would they, won't they, it's a moot point. And I'll show you the part in the article so you can see what I'm talking about. But here, someone said, I have a lot of first-generation students and students of color, and I would like them to get fair shots when they're looking for jobs. Other unions I've been a part of, there have been people joining even before they get into the job itself. And so Jen McLean said, so you're saying that unions are going to vet potential hires for game studios, and people are like, oh, I'm not comfortable with that. And the pro-union crowd got all upset because, yeah, that's essentially what unions do. And that's why they tend to be not good for all these diverse groups that the pro-union side is claiming they're going to be great for. No, that's not how it works. And then someone else said, was it someone else or the same person? Jen McLean again, speaking truth. It's amazing. The one person who actually has to work in this industry and deal with the publishers makes sense when she said about that job security, a union could enforce a lot of severance laws and negotiate for better severance, but they can't necessarily save the team. She said, placing the blame more on the saturation of the games market and the difficulty of discovering smaller projects. Yeah, there are business pressures, and people get mad at me for saying that. Well, I'm going to make you even angrier, because then they got into the issue of aptitude. And you know how I have this weird relationship with the idea of merit, and people get mad at me every time I touch on this subject. That doesn't make it not true. To reiterate, the idea of merit, the idea that hiring and promotion should be based on merit and the best person for the job should get the job. We all agree on that. The problem comes in defining merit. And poor Jen McLean made the mistake of talking about the endurance run that game dev is, and how people with mental and physical health challenges have trouble competing in these environments. Now, there is no shortage of people with mental health conditions in gaming. The question is whether the working conditions in gaming are making these mental and physical health challenges worse. And I think everybody could say yes. But Jen McLean argued this badly, but I think her heart was in the right place. She said, McLean said that everybody has a disability, some visible, some not, in response to how unions could protect those with mental health challenges whose aptitude may be lesser than able-bodied workers who can keep up with the exhaustion of unpaid overtime. Now, one of the participants, which Polygon did not name, and that's unfortunate, but that could just come down to note-taking. What you said is extremely ableist. Please apologize. You notice she didn't define what was ableist about that other than saying that the aptitude, in quotes, you see the quotes? Obviously, like they put the quotes in, aptitude is in quotes, meaning she wasn't subscribing to the objective idea of aptitude. The perception is that someone with a mental health challenge may be less able to cope with the stress of the job, but that is ableist. I know plenty of people who have gotten not fired from companies, but made so miserable that they quit for that exact issue. And calling it ableist doesn't solve the freaking problem. But now that we've sort of seen the shit show that was this debate at GDC, where somehow a whole bunch of people who were in general agreement couldn't agree on anything, we get down to the granular issues with unions. Now, first of all, it's the actual structure of the gaming industry itself, meaning, all right, a place like Poland, for instance, you know, where CD Projekt Red is, the cost of living is a lot lower. The purchasing power of local currency, are they in the euro? I don't remember. Yes, they are in the euro. So the purchasing power there, that they use the euro compared to France or Germany or any of those countries, is much higher than some of those France or Germany. And then they get massive incentives from their governments to make games. America's game developers cannot compete with that. And let's face it, the GDC folks, these are people working in America. So any game union would only apply to America. You can't force workers in Japan or Poland or France or even Canada, although Canada kind of comes along with whatever the US does. But you can't force workers in other countries to unionize just because workers in your country do. That's why Tim Schafer's example of the union shop lighting guys at the presentation is not a fair comparison. Because when you have a physical space at a physical time, yeah, you can control that room. But how do you unionize when your game is made in Montreal, some elements of the game, say your voice acting, are done in California, who's already covered by, you know, Screen Actors Guild, I think, or Actors Equity. There is some union with voice actors, because remember they went on strike. And then your QA is done in Shanghai. Some other quest mechanic is done in Belarus. How do you unionize that? Exactly. I don't know of any union that is international. So that's the first problem. The actual way these companies are structured, you've got a problem globally. You also have a serious problem within the United States in right to work legislation. And for people outside the United States, right to work legislation is a euphemism for union busting. It means that in right to work states, people are not required to join a union even when a company is unionized, even when the workforce in a company is unionized. They can leave the union at any time, refuse to pay dues at any time, and not lose their job, and yet they still benefit from any collective bargaining that the union manages to achieve. And this is what the US looks like in terms of right to work states. Look at all this blue. Blue is a right to work state. Gray is forced unionism state. You can tell the language here, right? But okay, California is a union state. And there's a lot of game companies in California, but right across the border, you've got Nevada, you've got Utah, you know, you've got Texas down here where BioWare Austin, you've got Florida down here where EA invests heavily in. A lot of game companies that are set up in California also have satellite campuses in right to work states for a reason. And that means that if a game company unionized, they could just pull up stakes, move into a right to work state, and then the union organizers have a serious problem, because without dues, a union cannot function. Without a functional union, the union has no teeth. And I have heard nothing that solves this problem whatsoever. The other issue with unionization comes down to the way people tend to get jobs in gaming. It's not what you know, it's who you know. It's connections. And I'd like to see more job fairs in video games. I'd like to see more people from the outside, not people who already have friends that work at companies, get a chance. I think that's a problem that they don't. But unions actually cut down on that as opposed to open it up. So those women and minorities and all that stuff, yeah, it's not going to have the effect they think it will. Wages, as far as I'm aware, are not a problem in AAA games. It's work hours, quality of life issues, and job security. So those high wages don't do you much good if you can't get a job. And I know a lot of people who worked their butts off for years and years and years, making friends on the inside of game companies and then working those friends at game companies to get a job. Now, we know this pipeline problem affects women and certain minority groups uniquely, especially Black people, because women, and the reason I say especially Black people is when we say minorities, it envelopes tons of people, Asian people, South Asian people. You know, we're really talking about Latinos and Blacks, Latin people. I will not say Latinx. Latin people and Black people. That's who we're really talking about in terms of the diversity issue, and then women in gaming. Because there's plenty of Asian people working in gaming already, okay? Like, it's not the same thing. Because I believe there's an element of certain stereotypes about certain racial groups that are beneficial to certain groups in the long term. But so for those groups, they don't have access to the pipelines. They didn't go to the quote unquote right schools. They don't know the right people. They didn't go to college with somebody who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy. So that makes it extremely difficult to get in to AAA game companies, because that's how they hire. It's very insular. They may claim it's not, but it is. So that leaves indie gaming. And indie gaming, it's interesting that a huge amount of the push for a union is in indie gaming, because indie shops are not going to be able to afford to unionize. Independent films in anywhere, in America and Canada and anywhere, they need special dispensation from the unions, because the unions know they can't afford to hire union people everywhere. My God, it's somebody's mom doing craft services. It's not a union craft services company. They can't afford it. And if AAA unionizes, which are the only companies that can afford to, and really, let's face it, these are the studios and the publishers that are driving the poor working conditions in gaming. Rockstar Games, you hear about the horrible crunch. We heard about the abusive staff at EA. Activision was the one that laid off all these people. These are the ones that are the problem. But how do I say this? If you unionize those shops, then there is going to be a divide between AAA union workers and then indie games. Because there won't be the ability to, somebody has their passion project, so they produce that indie-wise, and then they go back to AAA to make some money, and then they go back. Or, people like Vander Caballero, who just said to everything. He doesn't want to go back to AAA video games, so he's fine. But other people who bounce around, some of the people that sort of, they keep one foot in kind of each realm, they get kind of publishing help sometimes, they're going to get screwed, because unions are very tough on people who join the union and then do non-union work. When I used to cover Playboy Channel down in LA, Playboy was a non-union shop. So all of the camera ops were union people working under a false name. so they didn't get busted by their unions because there wasn't enough union work to tide them over for a whole year. And that's the thing, the other thing that I've seen in entertainment, and video games are a form of entertainment. Unions work very well for the privileged few that are on the inside of the union. They don't necessarily work great for the much broader community of people trying to either get into those union jobs or people who want to work independently outside of the union system, do things on smaller budgets, with interesting monetization or financing strategies. You can't get the free flow of ideas back and forth the same way. Now, there is admittedly less and less and less movement from indie to AAA and so on. They seem to be very separate camps as is. But I think it's really funny that it's these indie developers or these former AAA developers or whatever Tim Schafer is that are arguing for these things when it's not really going to help indie developers at all. If it helped indie developers will already be unionizing. Here's what I think gaming actually needs. Gaming needs an oversight board. It needs an ombudsman of some kind. Sexism, that's the word. Ombudsperson sounds weird. It needs basically a tip line where you can phone in abuses it's like a Better Business Bureau, abuses at a company. And then they can go in and they can pursue this company. Because when they know they're being watched, they're not going to crunch the same way. Other companies, I'm pretty sure, are going to be less likely to mass layoff and post record profits after people saw how everybody freaked out on Activision. Now, we're going to have to see what happens to Activision's bottom line long term, because I've seen this happen too many times. People are like, no, Activision's dead to me. And then they buy their games anyway. So we'll have to see. But they took a lot of crap for that. The rest of the industry watched. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. I completely agree. I've been saying for years, when developers were yelling at me that, no, it's the love of making games that causes us to crunch, instead of some perceived necessity. Yeah, developers actually did tell me off for that. Told me I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't care enough about video games. The crunch is employee abuse. The crunch is an indication that you either aren't hiring enough producers to manage your milestones, or those producers aren't empowered, or they're not very good at what they do. There are some studios that still crunch hard. There are a lot of them that don't. And I really think that this problem could be solved way easier without a ton of money being diverted to union dues. Just real simply. End the crunch. Make an industry-wide pledge to end the crunch. And then when it comes to layoffs, I think we need something like the Hero Initiative, because gaming, unfortunately, is an industry that is prone to shocks of multiple kinds. There's only so much job security a union could do anything about. Something like the Hero Initiative, which is a comic book organization that I did a ton of work for before I was determined to be an undesirable in comics, at least locally. But they do a lot of good work providing medical care for comic book artists, helping comic book artists who are between jobs find employment. That's the kind of thing we need in gaming. That's a lot more cost effective because, the Hero Initiative doesn't require dues. It's a charity. It works based on fundraising. That's the kind of thing we need. We need to take care of our own. And if a union is the only way that's going to work, then unions are going to go in. But I think that game companies, big and small, would be pretty stupid to have to wait for a union. I think that the CEOs in charge should make a real case to its shareholders that, long term, it's better for the company to invest in their workforce now and make fewer profits, lesser profits in the short term, but provide for the long-term health of the company in the long term, the way Ubisoft did in the 1990s. Now, they're much more privately held than EA or Activision, but Ubisoft in the 90s actually did anti-layoff initiatives where they did continuing education. They kept people. And they did it for completely capitalist reasons. The French company in gaming is being smart about capitalism. They were like, look, if we lay off all these people, all of our secrets, all of the way we do things, all of our best stuff goes with them. And we can't stop them. They signed NDAs. You can break those. You have to be able to prove they talked. And, you know, when some Ubi studios opened up, they're like, okay, there's all these unemployed people from EA and Rockstar. We're just going to take them and all the AAA knowledge they have. Awesome. Employee retention is good business. And if Ubisoft has figured this out, Ubisoft, who made Assassin's Creed Unity and periodically shits the bed and then go, yeah, guys, we shit the bed, we're sorry. Like, Ubisoft is not an evil genius of a company. They're not. But they figured this out. They realized that mass layoffs are bad for business. You're letting other people scoop up your good people because you couldn't find work for them. Just do the Ubisoft model. You do the Ubisoft model, you don't need a union for job security. So what's left? Unions don't help diversity. We don't have a salary problem, so they can't do very much about layoffs, and there's other ways that can. So what's left, really, that a union could benefit gaming? I'm open to hearing why. I'm open to hearing it. I want to solve these problems. The crunch should have died 5 years ago. And in part, that's because women don't want to work at companies that crunch on the whole. I mean, I'm generalizing here, full disclosure, but women don't want to work, as a rule, in places that have horrible work-life balance. So all this, well, we're not getting the applicants. Well, your workplace culture sucks. That's why. And, you know, if these companies were really serious about attracting more women, about attracting more people from Black and Latin backgrounds, they would work with this work-life balance thing. But they don't, because it's not a capitalist system. It's a neo-mercantilist system. And no union is going to solve that problem. Really interested in your comments on this. I'm not interested in debating the morality of unions. And I think that's the mistake that GDC did. They made it unions moral, non-unions amoral. It's not about that. Unions are a tool in service of workers' rights. There may be a better way to get those same rights. Maybe not. But there might be a better way. There is nothing moral or amoral on the structure of a union. It is a tool to achieve a goal that is moral. So I don't want to argue the morality of something. I want to argue practicalities. I want solutions here, because this is too important to fart around so badly that Kotaku and Polygon are the freaking voices of reason. I know, right? But hey, I gave credit where credit's due. I'm going to wrap there. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK, because YouTubers will never be part of any union.